Hello, welcome to Dialogue. I'm Wang Mumang in Beijing. The BRICS Summit, which has just wrapped up in Goa, India, is the annual meeting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. President Xi Jinping has attended the summit with his fellow heads of state, meeting for the second time this year after their previous gathering on the sidelines of the G20 in Hangzhou. As the new economic era dawns, how will China hope to develop and strengthen ties with its four fellow BRICS nations? What are the key achievements of this year's summit? And what challenges must BRICS face and overcome as the sluggish world economy continues to impede greater growth and prosperity? To discuss all these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Wang Yiwei, Director of the Institute of International Affairs at Renmin University of China, and KJM Varma, China correspondent for the Press Trust of India. And we'll also speak with Alexander Lukin, Vice President of the Russian Diplomatic Academy, via telephone. But before we begin our discussion, let's take a look at this.
It has been a hard year for the BRICS nations. China's growth has eased. A slump in commodity prices has dragged Russia and Brazil into recession. South Africa also felt the pain and could be the next to slip into stagnation. India is managing to keep the balance on growth expectations. According to the International Monetary Fund, India is due to expand 7.6% this year. China could pull off growth of 6.6%. South Africa's GDP growth stands at 0.1%. The growth rates for Russia and Brazil are to remain in negative territory. Exports have been a key part of the BRICS countries' expansion. Now that foreign demand has slowed, the five-nation group has turned to new opportunities. For instance, the bloc set up a BRICS Development Bank last year to lift investment. Bank officials say infrastructure construction projects could help create domestic demand.
The development of infrastructure is an important growth lever. Infrastructure contributes significantly to economic growth. So we see ourselves in a modest way contributing to that effort to stimulate the emerging market economies again.
The five BRICS nations account for 40% of the world's population and 30% of the world's territory. But each of the countries has its own issues to contend with. Brazil faces high unemployment, rising inflation, and political turmoil. Russia is mired in low oil prices and Western sanctions. South Africa needs to attract more foreign investment. China has to change its growth model towards one driven by the services sector and technology. India is the world's fastest growing country, but still suffers from stifling bureaucracy and underdeveloped rural areas.
Russia, Brazil, South Africa really want to step out. I think they need to focus on getting domestic affairs in order, and if they can do that successfully, then certainly there will be a lot of potential for them going forward.
Analysts say the future for the BRICS countries remains bright because the world's developing countries are still making significant contributions to global output. But there are no shortcuts. They hope the BRICS summit would build confidence and foster closer cooperation among its members.
Now we want to talk about BRICS policy as a whole and also intra-BRICS cooperation. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Professor Wang, let me start with you. I mean, policy coordination, financial cooperation, trade promotion, as well as anti-terrorism were just some of the primary concerns for the BRICS leaders. So what were your strongest impression of the BRICS summit this year?
Well, all these are very important issues for the BRICS countries. They face all kinds of challenges. These Indians, as a presidency, particularly focus more on the anti-terror, also other, interconnectivity, the infrastructure buildings, all this. I think they can reach some deal because this is a common strong needs for all the BRICS, particularly to stimulate economic growth and also for structural reform. Because it's after G20 Hangzhou summit, they made some promise we should take the BRICS to take a leading role to stimulate world economy growth and also structural reform and trade and investment negotiations.
Well, the BRICS leaders want to tackle economic challenges and at the same time cement their relations. Do you think that their plans, the announcement from this year's BRICS summit, you are seeing deliverables from this ambitious plan?
Certainly, I think I've just seen the closing ceremony of the BRICS, the release of the declaration of Goa BRICS summit. I think from all ends, it appears to be a very breakthrough summit as far as BRICS is concerned. After establishment of the BRICS Bank last year, I think there are some very clear-cut futuristic decisions that have been taken by BRICS leaders in this summit. What exactly Professor is referring to, I think those decisions have been reached. I understand. I just went through the declaration cursory. I had a cursory look at it, and there are agreements they have reached to set up an agriculture research center, and they want to further the cooperation in railways. They have brought in more areas of cooperation like sports, culture. So there already, I think this year the BRICS had a very interesting football series ahead of the BRICS summit in Goa. So they are expanding the cooperation, and more importantly, as he was saying, that I think from India's point of view, and of course from all the 5 countries' point of view, there was a very strong reference to cross-border terrorism in the declaration. The 5 leaders have agreed that terrorism has to be approached in a way that has to be curtailed in a united way by the global community. So from all ends, it appears that this is a very, very important summit, because BRICS is also closing down the 10 years. Now this is a decade of history, and I think this summit sets agenda for the next decade, I suppose.
And of course, countries under the BRICS framework have their own different development stage and their different political priorities. So, Professor Wang, do you see countries seizing this opportunity to align their strategies, and what are China's top concerns on the list?
Well, China will be the next presidency of the BRICS summit, and so it's a new decade. It's beginning from that. And particularly in the global phenomenon, there are so anti-globalization movement, sentiment arising. So it's more rely on the BRICS to kick off, put forward the new globalizations. So China, after G20 summit in Hangzhou, I think take a leading role jointly with India and other colleagues to put forward the agenda of the international trade and investment negotiation, to give them self-confidence about the BRICS, and also to increase their power in the IMF, World Bank, and other international institutions to put forward the global governance towards the more inclusive, justice, and sustainable directions. I think these are the Chinese highlights.
And now we want to get some Indian perspective. Mr. Varma, what do you think are the top concerns for Indian authorities at this year's summit?
Before I answer that, I think I also would like to say that we all should, this is a moment for us to remember the great deal of skepticism about BRICS in the last few years, especially the global economic slowdown and the slowdown of economies of a number of BRICS countries and all. I remember one of the top economists a few years ago coming to China and declared that probably China will be the only leading light in the entire BRICS. So BRICS is doomed, and India will be the first country to fall within the BRICS. Nothing of that sort happened. We have seen India growing at a very fast growth rate. We have seen Brazil, which is supposed to be having a very big economic crisis, hosting one of the finest Olympic Games. In the history of the Olympics. And Russia, of course, is on the stage of recovery, and they are probably one of the most finest innovators in terms of military technology. So the BRICS countries as a whole, of course, China is rejigging its economy. The slowdown appears to be not so big. It is still around 6.5 to 7%, which is still a big rather progress compared to many of the countries. So BRICS is on a very strong wicket economically. That is my point. Coming to India's concerns, India is looking for BRICS to consolidate on the investments front. There's a number of, India is now opening up in a big way, and opening up in a big way for the entire world, especially for the Chinese investments. And I'm happy to note that I've been hearing this from a number of Indian officials, that there is a steady flow of Chinese investments into India. And more importantly, China and India have certain level of differences on very key issues like, especially the cross-border terrorism from Pakistan. And there are a number of, it's not the bilateral differences, it's the extraneous differences concerning the third countries that are separating the two countries. But I think the BRICS Forum is providing both Mr. Xi Jinping and Mr. Prime Minister Mr. Modi a very frequent platform for them to meet and discuss. There is a great deal of consultation process between the two countries. And I think I've just been hearing that there are Indians are very satisfied with the kind of declaration that has come out of Goa summit. I do hope that from now onwards, the relationship will be on a different wicket.
And certainly the BRICS Summit provides an important platform for global foreign policy watchers to understand what kind of balance countries wish to maintain or strike. So we want to get some Russian perspective now, and let me bring in Alexander Lukin. He's Vice President of the Russian Diplomatic Academy. He's joining us on the line from Moscow. It's great to have you with us, Mr. Lukin. Now, as we know, the economies of the 5 countries have not been performing well in recent years, and Mr. Varma was just talking about the challenges that the bloc as a whole is facing. So I want to get your perspective on this. Is the BRICS in any economic and financial crisis?
Well, the main idea of BRICS is not economic. Actually, the group of BRICS, as we know it now, has nothing to do with that BRICS, or actually BRIC, that was predicted by the Goldman Sachs economists. The idea of BRICS, I think, is mostly geopolitical, because some countries are just far away from each other. So the BRICS is not a place where they discuss cooperation with each other in terms of economics and trade. BRICS is a platform for non-Western countries, major non-Western powers, I would say, to coordinate their position in various international organizations and promote non-Western agenda, I would say support non-Western course in some international organizations that are still dominated by the United States and its allies. For example, in World Trade Organizations, in WTO, and so on, and in World Bank, International Monetary Fund. They are trying to get more safe for non-Western world. So that's the main idea of BRICS. So I don't think, of course, economic cooperation is an issue, but it's not the main issue. Most countries of BRICS cooperate very well on bilateral level, like Russia and China, maybe China and India, Russia and India. So
you're saying that the BRICS countries are trying to pursue a non-Western agenda. So let's talk about this, Mr. Lukin. 3 joint statements and 16 agreements, including 3 defense deals, were forged between Russia and India Saturday on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. So have these 2 countries started what you think, well, if you may, a second honeymoon?
Well, you should mix everything up, you know. The bilateral relations with India and Russian state visit to India is not the same as BRICS summit. It has nothing to do with that. They just coincided. But generally speaking, Russian and Indian relations are developing pretty well. The trade and economic side is developing relatively slower compared to political relationship. But Russia has always been selling arms to India, for example. There's nothing new in it. And the fact that Russia and India agreed on, or India is going to purchase more Russian arms, there's nothing very special about it.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Lukin, for your perspectives on this. We want to get your reaction on this, Mr. Varma. Mr. Lukin was just saying that it's just coincidence. This defense deal is coincidence. It's not a part of the objective that the BRICS countries are trying to seek, or at least India and Russia have been trying to seek on the BRICS summit this year. So what's your take on this?
Oh, I think it is partly bilateral. It's no doubt about it. The India-Russia cooperation and China-Russia cooperation, it is a very well-known, well-recorded cooperation. In fact, it's much valued in India. Ties between Moscow and New Delhi have always been very close, and India banks on Russia for a host of things, especially when it comes to the military modernization. Regarding BRICS and bilateral cooperation, I think, as he said, that we are dealing from rather distance. Distance is what is a big problem between BRICS countries. But the entire concept has been evolved as emerging economies. I think that part of it, we cannot take it away. I mean, without your economic content, we need to be economically strong to be a bloc. And even if you're looking at a geopolitical strategic terms, I think each of us have a very different outlook towards world and alliances and all that. India-China relationship and China-Russia relationship are evolving and the world order is changing very fast, more than what we comprehend. There are alliances, new alliances coming up. There was a talk about Russia moving away from India a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, until, of course, this particular deals have been clinched. But these are all kind of things that I think the important thing for BRICS countries is to stay together, to look for commonalities and complementarities. And I think at this point of time, economy, markets, and trade liberalization and cooperation on research and exchanging science and technology, and of course, besides putting up a very strong united front in rather organizations like United Nations, is a very consolidated kind of a progress for BRICS. That should go on. I think if you look at BRICS ministers and BRICS leaders meets very, very often on every global platform. Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi just met in Hangzhou last month.
So of course, solidarity is very important for this framework to develop and to strengthen their ties.
BRICS is an evolving organization. It has just been 10 years. And they are, of course, trying to work out what will be a futuristic organization will be. And as he says, perhaps, maybe a time will come where we take a very united strategic positions on geopolitical issues.
Well, we're going to continue our discussion on intra-BRICS cooperation and the future of this bloc. You're watching Dialogue. Stay with us for more. Welcome back to Dialogue. Bilateral cooperation is also very important under the BRICS framework. So, gentlemen, we'd like to have your insights on this. It seems that China and India have been working closely together on quite a number of issues. For example, the two countries are trying to enhance their security cooperation, and at the same time there have been reports that China is trying to garner support from India on its Belt and Road Initiative in exchange for backing India's bid to join the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the NGS. So how would you make of this possibility of this exchange, and what would that mean for bilateral relations?
Well, this is two separate independent issues. I think the Indians join nuclear supply group because India is not a founder of the non-proliferation treaty, so China are not in favor of that. But the Belt and Road Initiative is joint development. India has so many concerns. For instance, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, because it's past Kashmir, and India claimed all the Kashmir as India's territory, and also for trans-border terrorism, migrants, many problems. But Pakistan said this is Pakistan's dominant area, so nothing related with India. But then India said, why not, just pass around India? Pakistan maybe extend also to India, and also India has so-called art policy. India very concerned. India very worry about the Chinese Belt and Road, both from the continent and the maritime, undermine maybe India's influence, particularly in the Indian Ocean, and also Bangladesh, Myanmar, China, India economic corridor. Also, India, concerns more from the environmental, migration, security, more technician concerns.
Well, India,
but Belt and Road Initiative, I think, a benefit for all. India's states, I think, particularly of the northeast, they're very actively participating in Belt and Road Initiative.
So as you mentioned, India is trying to use this Act East policy to strengthen its linkage with South Asia and Southeast Asia. So where do you see that coming?
Oh, well, to take the point that where he was mentioning about the China-Pakistan corridor, I think there were undoubtedly very strong problems for India in that case, because Kashmir dispute is on the particularly UN table, and the part of the territory that Pakistan has conceded to China is also, there is a line in that particular treaty that it is subjected to the settlement of Kashmir issue between India and China. So there is a historical problem, but it is not such an insurmountable problem. I don't think so. But at the same time, if the current process of consultation between India and China is manifold. So if in the process they manage to work out a working relationship, because this is undoubtedly China's biggest rather project, the Belt and Road.
Do you see this Act East policy, this initiative, could be in conflict with China's Belt and Road Initiative?
Certainly not. Why should it be a conflict between that? Because if China is building up its relations with various South Asian countries, which are neighbors of India and part of the Indian subcontinent, why not India outreach to the Southeast Asian countries, which is, of course, is the most economically significant, both for China and India. I think that's where the commonalities, as far as even the South China Sea dispute is concerned, I think India has struck a very, very cautious note. They have taken Chinese rather sensitivities into consideration, even after the International Tribunal, that the July verdict, whatever the controversy it created. So I think basically it's important for, that's what probably the two countries are doing, not losing cool over these differences. They're trying to have as much discussions as possible to strike a common ground. But it is very important that they don't let a third country to get in to their relationship and spoil their relationship. That should be, I think, in my view, should be a very important factor in both the countries. But if you see in the recent differences between the two countries, it's not about bilateral differences. We have a very stable border mechanism that has been going on. We have nearly 19 rounds of border talks, and every year the national security advisors have been meeting this, and there is a considerable, about 40 mechanisms between India, both economic, defense, science and technology, and recently they held anti-terrorism dialogue. The first anti-terrorism, counter-terrorism dialogue has been held. So there is a very steady progress. So, but at the same time, I think I understand from both Mr. Xi's speeches as well as Prime Minister Modi's speeches, is that each country should respect the strategic concerns of the other. So I think that is where probably a common ground can emerge.
So
even we focus on the synergies of the
Professor.
strategies.
Yes.
So you have your strategy, Belt and Roads. We can.
That's what probably the discussions are
What
about.
kind of commonalities do you see in these two different strategies? How could they align these two strategies?
Well, Belt and Road Initiative under East, I think the most for development, common development. Like India, I think still 300 million people suffered even without enough electricity power. So Belt and Road Initiative focus on the infrastructure building. There is a benefit for the Indian people, lift up poverty, and also industrial park, economic zone, primarily welcome.
So let's talk more about this conflict in Kashmir. India registered Kashmir. Do you also see rifts in opinion at this year's BRICS summit?
No, hardly it figured in that. I think there is a very common understanding that in this particular BRICS summit, where all the 5 countries have taken a very strong stand against that is cross-border terrorism. And Kashmir issue, I think India probably has been addressing in its own way, in many ways. You have annual elections in Kashmir every 5 years. There is a government. There are problems, of course, that, because India blames the situation time and again being rather complicated by these elements of people who are crossing from across the border from Pakistan into and creating a very violent atmosphere in the valley. But at the same time, India also has the responsibility to maintain peace and security in Kashmir and take care of the people and address the human rights concerns. There's absolutely no two opinions about it. I think the entire political leadership, the government and the opposition in India are very, very strong about this particular. But again, there are some violent agitations, so which has to be addressed, I think. So on that score, one can only hope that the situation gets stabilizes in the near future, so that a peace process can be back on track.
Right. Now, moving from security, we also want to talk about financial cooperation between BRICS countries. For example, the establishment of the rating agency, and this is, of course, one of the major outcomes of this year's summit. Do you see that posing a major challenge to the dominance of the existing three Western rating agencies?
I don't think so. I think BRICS should work to reform the global governance structure. The Western dominant rating system is unfair for other countries.
So is this part of the BRICS plan to pursue a non-Western agenda?
Well, it's reform, not just let the West dominate. It's not just zero-sum game, I think.
Yeah, to put it in perspective, I think this particular BRICS rating agency is something that they don't want. I mean, when we have international rating agencies, often there is criticism about their fairness in evaluating the economies objectively. So perhaps this will help in many ways to rather alleviate that kind of a thing, to bring that kind of an objectivity into assessing our economic situations and come out with a kind of a rating, more acceptable rating within the countries.
Well, the BRICS has come a long way, and certainly there's a lot more to be discussed here on this platform. But thank you so much, gentlemen, for your thoughtful discussion on this edition of Dialogue. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Wang Mumang. Thanks for watching.